The chapel smelled of lilies and broken promises. The stained glass windows painted the aisle in soft colors of gold and rose, but all Grace Carter saw was the blur of faces and lips moving, lips forming words she could not hear. Her bouquet trembled in her hands, daisies she'd picked herself that morning, because she couldn't afford roses. Her eyes were fixed on the grand wooden doors at the end of the aisle, the doors her fiancé Tilda Copyright was supposed to walk through half an hour ago. The world had always been silent for Grace, but never this painfully so. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unexpected love, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories to life. Grace had lived her entire life in a quiet world, not by choice, but by fate. She was born deaf, and though her parents had once dreamed big for her, they drifted away after her mother passed when Grace was 14. Her father had drowned himself in work, and later, in alcohol, until one night he never came home. Grace grew up learning to read lips and emotions instead of words. She worked as a florist, her fingers learning the language of petals and stems and the quiet poetry of colors that never mocked or pitied her. When she met Ryan, a young lawyer who had come to buy flowers for his mother's grave, she thought life was finally giving her something back. He was charming, confident, and he learned to sign slowly, awkwardly, but enough to make her believe he cared. For 2 years, she dreamed of that moment, walking down the aisle in her modest white dress, surrounded by people who finally saw her as more than her silence. But now, the whispers that rippled through the chapel told her everything she didn't want to know. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see them. Pity, shock, some even smirked. Her maid Ivana tried to sign something. He's not coming. Grace's knees weakened. Her bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thud she couldn't hear. The minister looked away, uncomfortable. Guests began standing, their voices low, their eyes heavy with sympathy. She stood there, frozen, the tears streaming down her face, not from heartbreak alone, but humiliation. She couldn't even hear her own sobs. The silence felt like a punishment. In that moment, Grace wished she could disappear. When she finally stepped out of the chapel, the sun had turned harsh and cold. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the white ribbon she tied to her car fluttered weakly in the wind. Her hands shook as she opened the door, her vision blurred from tears. She wanted to scream, but no sound came, just silence, thick and cruel. She didn't see the man watching from across the courtyard, the janitor, with a broom in one hand and a small boy sitting on the steps beside him, holding a paper airplane. His name was Mark Dalton, a single father who worked 2 jobs to take care of his 6-year-old son, Jamie. He had been cleaning the side hall when he noticed the commotion. He'd seen weddings before, the laughter, the flash of cameras, the joy, but never one that ended in heartbreak before it began. Mark didn't know her, but something in the way she stood, trembling, alone, fighting not to fall apart, hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't sure what to do, but his son, small and curious, tugged at his sleeve and pointed. "Daddy," Jamie whispered, "she's sad." Mark nodded slowly, watching as Grace sat on the edge of the stone fountain, clutching her hands, her veil tangled in the wind. He knew that kind of sadness, the kind that comes from promises broken, the kind that leaves scars you can't see. He'd lost his wife years ago, during childbirth, and since then, silence had lived in his heart too. He hesitated, but then he put down his broom and took Jamie's hand. They walked toward her quietly. Grace didn't notice until a small shadow fell across her lap. She looked up, startled, her tear-streaked eyes meeting the boy's innocent face. He held out his paper airplane to her. It was clumsy, made of a crumpled piece of notebook paper, but on it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't cry, lady." Her lips trembled. She looked at the boy, then at the man standing behind him. Mark's eyes were gentle, steady. He knelt down slightly so she could see his face. Slowly, carefully, he moved his hands, not perfectly, but enough that she understood. "Are you okay?" Her breath caught. Most people didn't bother to try signing, especially strangers. She nodded weakly, then shook her head. Her fingers moved uncertainly, signing back. "He's gone." Mark hesitated, then signed, "I'm sorry." The motion was slow, his expression sincere. There was no pity in his eyes, just quiet understanding. Grace looked at him for a long time before lowering her gaze. She didn't know why, but in that moment, she didn't feel invisible. Over the next few days, Grace tried to return to normal, if normal meant staring blankly at the flowers she once loved. The little shop felt empty, and the smell of roses now made her sick. She had returned her dress, packed away the photos, and tried to convince herself that love just wasn't meant for her. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the girl who wasn't enough, not beautiful enough, not normal enough, not worthy of being chosen. But one morning, as she unlocked the shop door, she saw a small figure waiting outside. Jamie, holding a bouquet of wildflowers tied together with a piece of string. Behind him stood Mark, carrying a mop and wearing his janitor's uniform. Grace blinked in surprise. Jamie smiled shyly and handed her the bouquet. There was a note attached: "For the lady who makes sad flowers look alive." She couldn't help but smile, even as tears filled her eyes. Mark shrugged, signing with a small grin. He insisted. That simple gesture became the start of something unexpected. Every few days, Mark would stop by after his shift, sometimes to pick up flowers for the church, sometimes just to say hello. Jamie loved exploring the shop, asking questions Grace couldn't hear, but she could read his lips well enough to understand. The boy had a way of filling the room with energy, laughter, and small, innocent light. And Mark, quiet, thoughtful Mark, would often stay to help sweep the floor or fix things around the shop that she didn't even realize were broken. Slowly, the silence that used to suffocate Grace began to feel softer. She started teaching Mark and Jamie simple signs: a thank you, flower, happy. They learned quickly, their hands clumsy but eager. One evening, as they shared tea after closing time, Mark told her in his slow, careful signs about his wife, about how she had been sick during pregnancy, how he'd lost her and raised Jamie alone. Grace watched his hands move, his eyes heavy with memories, and she felt something stir inside her: empathy, connection, and something she hadn't dared to feel again: hope. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed, and with them, Grace's heart. She laughed more, she painted again, she began designing wedding bouquets without bitterness. And yet, there were moments when the past crept back, the nights when she'd wake from dreams of that silent chapel, her heart pounding. Mark noticed. He always did. He'd find her staring out the window, lost in thought, and without a word, he'd sit beside her and sigh softly, "You're not alone." It was on one such evening, almost a year after the day she was left at the altar, that Grace found herself at the same chapel again. She had come to deliver flowers for another wedding. As she placed the last vase near the altar, her hands trembled. The memories were sharp, vivid, painful. She thought she had healed, but the ache still lived somewhere deep inside. Mark had come along to help carry the arrangements, Jamie trailing behind with his paper airplanes as always. When Mark saw her standing frozen by the aisle, he set down the box and walked up to her. She didn't move, just stared at the spot where she had once stood in white, waiting for a man who never came. Her lips trembled as tears welled up. Mark reached out, gently turning her toward him. She tried to smile, but her chin quivered. Her hands moved uncertainly, signing, "Why wasn't I enough?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted his hands and signed back, not perfectly, but with all the emotion in his heart. "You were too much, too good, too kind. He didn't deserve you." Her tears fell freely then. Mark hesitated, then took a deep breath and added something else, words that would forever stay with her. "You deserve happiness." Grace covered her mouth, the sob escaping even though she couldn't hear it. The words, the motion, the sincerity, it broke her open. Mark stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You deserve happiness," he sighed again, slower this time, each gesture deliberate and tender. For the first time in her life, Grace felt seen, not for what she lacked, but for what she was. Her silence wasn't a barrier anymore, it was a language, and somehow, he spoke it fluently. Months later, the chapel once again smelled of lilies, but this time, the air carried warmth instead of sorrow. Grace stood at the front again, wearing a soft ivory dress, daisies woven into her hair. Jamie stood proudly beside Mark, holding a small ring box. When the minister asked if they were ready, Grace looked at Mark, her eyes shining, her hands trembling with joy. And when she signed "I do," he smiled and signed back the same. As the crowd clapped, Jamie's paper airplane soared through the air, gliding gently between them, a symbol of how something broken can fly again. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to Kindness Stories for more tales that remind us how love can bloom in the quietest corners of life. Theo 1/4 special request, comment below with the words "You deserve happiness," because someone out there needs to be reminded today. And as Grace and Mark walked hand in hand down that same aisle where her heart once shattered, she realized something beautiful. Sometimes, silence isn't emptiness, it's space for a new kind of love to be heard.